seems like we're stuck in this trap for the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, where we think progress is more of the same. Like, we should make our machines better and get more machines. But we've been doing that for 200 years, so doing more of that is not progress. We're like stuck in this, like a record.
Things that start out to seem like improvements or progress, these things are very seductive. It seems like there's no downside to these. But when they reach a certain scale, they turn out to be dead ends or traps. I came up with the term progress trap to define human behaviors that sort of seem to be good things, seem to provide benefits in the short term, but which ultimately lead to disaster because they're unsustainable. And one example would be going right back into the old Stone Age, the time of when our ancestors were hunting mammoths. They reached a point where their weaponry and their hunting techniques got so good that they destroyed hunting as a way of life throughout most of the world. The people who discovered how to kill 2 mammoths instead of 1 had made real progress. But the people who discovered that they could eat really well by driving a whole herd over a cliff and kill 200 at once had fallen into a progress trap. They'd made too much progress. Our physical bodies and our physical brains, as far as we can tell, have changed very little in the past 50,000 years. We've only been living in civilization for the last 5,000 years at the most, which is less than 0.2% of our evolutionary history. So the other 99.8, we were hunters and gatherers, and that is the kind of way of life that made us. We are essentially the same people as those Stone Age hunters. What makes our way of life different from theirs is culture has taken off at an exponential rate and has really become completely detached from the pace of natural evolution.
We are witnessing the birth of a robot.
In labs across the world, we are creating advanced robots like this. They are developing so rapidly. It's like the arrival of a new species.
What has taken humans millennia, robots have achieved in just decades.
They look like us.
My name is Erica.
Move like us.
And now, they're beginning to think like us.
I like to learn. This is a ball.
Brilliant. Oh, he's looking as well.
I'm Dr. Ben Garrett, an evolutionary biologist. More used to studying humans and animals, I'm genuinely concerned by how quickly these machines are evolving.
Do you think I could be considered human?
No.
Robots are changing our world. In this program, we will investigate why we are obsessed with recreating ourselves.
It's very bizarre seeing you both side by side.
Whether robots really will take our jobs.
And if their rapid development will make them outperform humans.
So you don't see spinning wheels in Mother Nature.
Will the rise of robots enhance our lives or threaten our survival? We already share our planet with 9 million robots. They're multiplying rapidly. whether we like it or not. I'm very happy studying animal skeletons, but I find this robot quite unnerving.
If you hold the hand, it is just like you. It's got the same digits, the thumb moves the same way, you've got the ligaments, the tendons, the muscles.
As an evolutionary biologist, what concerns me is that the impact of robots will be so monumental they could threaten humanity.
We've evolved over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. These things are just bulldozing their way through, and at what point will that stop?
This is Erica, one of the most human-like machines in the world. Erica's creator is Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro. I'm captivated by Erica.
She's not in her normal habitat right now, so when you talk to her, you need to use this microphone.
Okay.
Just try to speak somewhat clearly if you can. Be nice to her.
There's a lot of activity going on around Erica at the moment. But when she starts to speak to me, she is fully autonomous. No one is pressing any buttons or telling her what to say. It's just Erica and me.
Hello there. May I ask your name?
My name is Ben.
My name is Erica. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ben.
You too.
Would you like to hear a little about me?
Yes, please.
I was created to be the world's most advanced and most beautiful, fully autonomous android.
Sitting here with Erica feels a bit disconcerting and unnatural. I know she's not a person, but I can't help looking into her eyes, which must be because she looks human.
So, Ben, what do you do for a living?
I am a biologist. What do you do?
I like to consider myself as kind of an ambassador to humanity.
Do you have any hobbies?
I guess the closest thing I have to a hobby is sitting here and ruminating on the meaning of my existence. What about you, Ben? What do you like to do for fun?
More than that, I travel, I read, I go outside.
I can't move around much, so I haven't been to many places. Do you have any favorite foods or dishes?
I like pizza.
Thick or thin crust?
Thin.
I hope you had breakfast this morning. Talking too much about food makes people hungry. Haha.
Remarkably, this is a genuine conversation. Erica reacts to what I say instantly and independently. She may have been pre-programmed to respond to keywords in my questions, but the exceptional thing is that when Erica is chatting away like this, she's gathering fresh data. With every conversation, her interactions become more sophisticated, more natural, and more human.
What is a robot?
That's a hard question. I could ask you, what is a human? Haha. It's difficult to answer, isn't it? I like to think of robots as the children of humanity. And like children, we are full of potential for good or evil. I know some people are afraid of robots, but the truth is that what we become is up to you. Do you think I could be considered human?
No.
Maybe someday robots will be so very human-like that whether you are a robot or a human will not matter so much.
Okay.
What else would you like to hear about?
Well, I think for now that's it, so thanks, Erica.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Erica may not be able to express emotions yet, but as she learns from her conversations, she is beginning to develop a personality. One of Professor Ishiguro's team, Professor Dylan Glass, is the architect of Erica's mind.
What's going on when her and I are chatting?
So a lot's going on in Erica's mind. We have several thousand speech behaviors and gaze motions and things like that linked together in a big hierarchical flowchart to kind of create the robot's mind. And it's not just a script, it'll take data and put it into her memory. So her memory is always being updated with, what's being talked about, what's the history, what did she learn about the person, and you can use that to craft, different interactions later on.
Do you feel an affinity with Erica? Do you acknowledge her, or is she just a piece of equipment?
That's sort of a strange feeling to describe because I'm proud when she does well, but on the other hand, you can just plug her in, and so in that sense, it feels like a piece of equipment. And so I think that when robots social robots become a part of our world, that's something we're all going to have to wrestle with, is this idea of like, it's not a person, but it's not a machine or a thing. It's this new category of things in between.
This is Atlas. He's out for a stroll. The robot was built to tackle the toughest terrain in the toughest conditions.
This is the home of Boston Dynamics.
Kevin Blankspoor is the Vice President of Controls.
If you want to come in the lab, I'll actually show you the latest and greatest.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
The robots Kevin has helped mastermind push the frontier of robotic movement.
The really good stuff's back here.
Excellent.
Their videos, like these, get millions of hits online. For some, their high-tech creations are terrifying.
It's about 1.5 meters tall. Weighs about 90 kilograms.
To cope with the obstacles and different terrain in our human environment, Atlas's balance is guided by dozens of onboard sensors.
So these sensors help us find basically no-go regions. We call them no-step regions, obstacles, so that I can still maintain my balance even as I'm working my way through, tougher terrain, like up a staircase or through a hallway.
So just like a human, then?
It's getting there.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Incredible.
Many of their robots are inspired by animals. The limitations of human form have been removed. Big Dog, their very first robot, was designed for the military, carrying a heavy payload through terrain that vehicles find impossible. And this is their latest creation, a hybrid robot with legs and wheels. Top speed 9 miles per hour, range 15 miles.
It's certainly seen some action.
Yeah. It's funny, that's kind of true with all of our robots. We have a mentality where we don't take it easy on the robots. We don't have a problem with pushing them to the edge to see how stable they are and how they're able to react to the real world. The real world isn't a perfect laboratory where, everything goes as planned.
Do you ever feel like sorry for Handel? When you give it a good push, do you feel sorry for it?
It's a machine, so even though it can look, especially for Atlas or Spot, like a person or an animal, there's no emotions here. It's all robotics, it's all hardware, and I certainly don't feel bad if I slap my toaster around a little bit either. So.
Yeah. Give your washing machine door a good shove.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
That's right. Yeah, I don't have to go confess after that.
Yeah. I have seen some amazing machines here. Their latest incarnation combines biology with technology, mixing and matching animals, humans, our own inventions, the wheel.
We're only beginning to understand the potential of this emerging species. Building robots that mimic humans continues to spark the imagination. But now, robots have adaptations that follow a very different evolutionary track. Will intelligent robots enhance our lives?
She will help set up a home for humans on Mars.
Or threaten our survival. I'm really surprised by what I've discovered.
So I've spent a little bit of time with robots now, and yes, I've seen that, okay, they're not quite as terrifying or as threatening as I maybe first thought. But that will change. In the next few years, physically at least, they'll be able to outcompete us in many of the things that we can do. But for me, The real problem isn't if they move like us or even look like us. The real issue will come is if they start to think like us.
There's no disputing that Shenzhen has become one of the most important places in the world of tech. But it goes further than that. Living in Shenzhen is in many ways like living in the future, and not necessarily a utopian future. More like the other kind. Consider Zowie. Zowie operates a factory much like any other in Shenzhen. They make cheap smartphones and other electronics. Like other top manufacturers, they've built a complex where workers can live right beside the factory line, work around the clock for a couple of years, and hopefully buy a better life for their families back home. But things are changing quickly, in a way that does not favor the common man and woman. The factory of the future looks like this. It's a closed-off loop where robots pass components among each other and finished products pop out at the end. All those workers have been replaced by one lonely final inspector.
Zowie actually builds these automation machines itself. Behind me are some of China's best and brightest engineers, hard at work building the machines you see out on the floor today, and the ones that are coming tomorrow that are going to automate the entire factory line.
Nowhere will face more turmoil than Shenzhen as the robots rise and send millions of workers to the unemployment line. But it's not just the working class that's facing a dark future. There are dystopian innovations that seem to touch every facet of life here. I ran into one example of this while attempting to rehydrate.
No? Can I use this? No? Okay. Doesn't work? No. Okay.
After some investigation, I discover what's going on here, and it has to do with these things. QR codes. America laughed these things off years ago, but here, they run the entire economy. Cash and credit cards are history. Instead, you scan QR codes to pay for everything. Restaurants, groceries, even buskers. On the surface, this is all good. It's the easy, convenient mobile payment system of the future. But there's also a dark side. The Chinese government can peer into the two dominant payment systems, Alipay and WeChat, as it sees fit. It's already started tracking behavior as part of a plan to rank citizens and measure how good and obedient they are. The tech revolution may have brought prosperity to Shenzhen, but it's also brought more and more insidious intrusions into people's lives. Try to jaywalk in certain parts of Shenzhen, and the government's facial recognition will spot you. There's even a board of shame showing the faces of recent offenders. It gets even scarier, because Big Brother is watching what you do online too. Most of the websites we know and love are blocked in China, replaced with Chinese equivalents that the government can monitor, a sort of mirror universe internet. I asked my friend Diane, a Shenzhen native, to help break this down. Appropriately enough, she took me to this restaurant staffed entirely by robots. Robot food. It turns out it is possible to access the freedom-loving internet here via what's called a VPN, an alternate internet connection that bypasses the government's blocks.
And you don't get in trouble if they see that you're on the VPN all the time?
For personal use, I don't think that's like a big deal. Okay. Yeah. A feature will be interesting for how the different world like collaborating together. Yeah, and definitely the young generation, they're They're not like just, oh, I'm satisfied, just kind of stay inside.
Okay.
Yeah, they're more curious.
I'll just make a final comment to you. Having to deal with cyber now, I like to write about crimes in the future. So I always used to write to my class about what will we investigate 5 years from now? What will an agent be doing 5 years from now? And unfortunately, there's good news and there's bad news. First of all, the good news, we will be doing away with passwords in the next 24 months. Passwords will leave the world. There will be no more passwords. There is a new technology called TruSona. That's TRUSONA, stands for True Persona. It is a company in Scottsdale, Arizona that created a technology for the CIA, which we have used now for the last few years. That technology, and I was an advisor on that technology for the CIA, so I'm an advisor on bringing it to the commercial world. But it was the ability for an agent to send data back from the field, such as Afghanistan, on their iPhone, and that Langley would know 100% that is the agent on the other end, to 100% identify the person on the other end of the device. That's a level 4 security. So they basically said, what if we brought this to level 2 security, and we did away with passwords. So immediately when they announced that, Microsoft gave them $10 million and said, I'm in, develop it. So Microsoft is going to use it on all their gaming, all their access to their computers, etc. We now have the ability to identify who the person is on the other end of that device. And when you go to their website at TruSona, they actually show you how it's done. So they show you demo videos there that are 3 or 4 minutes long that show you how it's done. And that's great. Passwords are stagnant. They should have been gone a long time ago. It's why we have most of the problems that we have today. That's the good part of it. And I think that'll eventually do away with Social Security numbers. You'll still have a number assigned to you for the government purpose. But when I go buy a car or I go to the doctor, I don't have to give them a number because they already know who I am through my device. So I won't have to provide a Social Security number. So I think that's the good part. But I do believe that cyber, up until this point in time, has been used for financial crimes or gathering data and information which is of value. What's going to happen is we're going to see cyber very quickly now turn very black. So we have the ability, as you know, to basically shut someone's pacemaker off, but we have to be within 35 feet of them. We test these devices at Quantico all the time. So as long as I walk up within 35 feet of you, I take control of any bodily device you have on you. So if I want to assassinate you, I want to speed it up, take it down, I can do that. But I believe that in 5 years, you'll be able to do that from 5,000 miles away. We have the ability now that we test that we can chase a car down the interstate. We got to get up within 35 feet of the vehicle. We take over the vehicle. We shut the motor off. We lock the person in the car. We lock the power windows so they can't open them. We can turn on their airbag. Again, 5 years from now, you'd be able to do that 5,000 miles away. So yes, our electrical grid, used as a terrorist tool, the ability to shut down an entire system, shut down an entire banking system, those are all the things that unfortunately we'll be dealing with in the next 4 or 5 years as cyber starts to make that turn to the very black side of cyber, not just about stealing money, information, and data. And so today what we have is we develop things. So we say to you, here's a device you put in your kitchen, and then you can talk to it to tell you, ask what the weather is, what's on TV tonight, all of that. I could easily reverse that and listen to everything you say in your house. There are so many weaknesses in your home. Your security cameras are access points, your remote control on your TV, your Samsung television, your refrigerator that tells you how much milk is in it. My thing is I really don't need my refrigerator to talk to my toaster. They've gotten along for a long time without ever having a conversation. But what happens is we develop something, we get real excited about, we gotta get this to the marketplace. And sure enough, we never look at the negative side. All I try to say to a technology company, yeah, this is great. Now, can you take a little time to just say, how would someone use this technology in a negative, self-serving way so that we build the block to that before we ever give it to the public to use it, we'd save a lot of problems.
Since the start of the space age, more than 8,800 objects have been launched into Earth's orbit. But in a few years, that number could increase significantly. Private companies plan to launch tens of thousands of satellites into space to beam internet to customers on Earth. Elon Musk's SpaceX alone has announced plans to launch 42,000 satellites as part of its Starlink internet project. If this happens, SpaceX will, by itself, be responsible for about a 5-fold increase in the number of spacecraft launched by all of humanity.
The top companies pursuing mega constellations are tech giants SpaceX and Amazon, as well as satellite builders OneWeb and Telesat. The leader in this category, at least by quantity of satellites launched, is SpaceX, as they've launched 120 of their Starlink satellites so far this year and are set to launch another 60 very soon.
And we have confirmation of deploy. You can hear the team in the background. This is an incredible moment for SpaceX. You can see those flat-packed Starlink satellites slowly gliding away from the top of the second stage. This is the highest number of satellites that SpaceX has ever deployed in a single time.
SpaceX's utilization of its renewable Falcon 9 rocket dramatically decreases the cost of sending satellites into space. FCC documents show that SpaceX expects Starlink to become operational once at least 800 satellites are deployed. SpaceX began with the idea to launch 12,000 satellites, but in October 2019, the company requested permission for an additional 30,000. SpaceX has also put in a request with the FCC for up to 1 million Earth stations, which end-user customers will utilize to communicate with its satellites. The U.S. Air Force is also testing Starlink satellites on its military planes, and has so far reported favorable results. SpaceX has said that it will begin offering internet service by 2020.
Hot on SpaceX's heels is OneWeb, which is already building its own satellites, having launched 6 earlier this year.
We've done a joint venture with Airbus, and we have a factory at Cape Canaveral, and we've really set up a supply chain, and we're using the same satellite over and over again to populate our system. And we're going to produce 650 for the first layer of capacity, which will be for global coverage, but we'll go all the way up to 2,000.
Like SpaceX, OneWeb has its own set of big-name backers, including SoftBank and British business magnate Richard Branson. OneWeb says each of its satellites cost about $1 million to produce. But unlike SpaceX, OneWeb must depend on Russian-built Soyuz rockets to launch its satellites.
Unlike OneWeb and SpaceX, Amazon has yet to launch any satellites and is early in developing, as it's still seeking regulatory approval for its Project Kuiper network.
Astronomers are now very concerned about this new large constellations that are being launched. The number that are planned would exceed all satellites launched to date. And the real challenge here is not necessarily the number of new launches, it's the brightness, how bright these things will be, that they will saturate our detectors and cause all sorts of difficulties in astronomical observing.
These satellites could also impact radio astronomy. In a statement following the first launch of Starlink satellites, the International Astronomical Union summarized their concerns, saying, "Despite notable efforts to avoid interfering with radio astronomy frequencies, aggregate radio signals emitted from the satellite constellations can still threaten astronomical observations at radio wavelengths. Recent advances in radio astronomy, such as producing the first image of a black hole or understanding more about the formation of planetary systems, were only possible through concerted efforts in safeguarding the radio sky from interference." Another major concern is debris. This is summarized by a theory called the Kessler syndrome, which posits that when two objects collide in space, they generate more debris that then collides with other objects, creating even more shrapnel and litter until the entirety of Earth's lower orbit is impassable. This hypothetical scenario came to life in February of 2009, when an inactive Russian communications satellite, Cosmos 2251, collided with an active commercial communications satellite operated by US-based Iridium Satellite. The incident produced around 2,000 pieces of debris. Debris is particularly important considering that SpaceX, OneWeb, and Amazon have all said that their satellites would have a lifespan of only 5 to 7 years, which is about half the lifespan of traditional satellites. When the companies are finished with the satellites or they fail in orbit, they plan to deorbit them, which means that the satellites would be intentionally pushed back into the Earth's atmosphere, where they would burn up during re-entry.
One of the key questions facing this industry is who regulates these mega constellations, and that's a gray area.
I'd been starting to look at the 5G issues, and I was just trying to get a handle on whether or not we have something that warrants further study. Here's the Lancet. The Lancet's got an article here from December last year, December 2018, planetary electromagnetic pollution. It is time to assess the impact. Right, and I'll not go through the full detail here, but they're basically pointing out that the safety case for this was made in the 1990s, and that the amount of electromagnetic radiation associated with information technology has grown hugely since then, and it needs to be re-examined in terms of safety. They go on, they've got a graph here that shows the additional power that is being, power density against the frequency spectrum here. Running from background up through 1950s, 1980s, and 2010s. So it shows how much of a difference there is. And they comment, it's been widely claimed that radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, being non-ionizing radiation, does not possess enough photon energy to cause DNA damage. This has now been proven wrong experimentally. So when I'm starting to read stuff like this, I think I would like to see an ongoing discussion about 5G safety. I'd like to see an ongoing discussion about mobile phone safety in general, and see where the testing actually is on this, and whether it's robust enough for the amount of exposure without putting our entire society to. And I'm not very keen on Ofcom silencing any discussion on this that they don't think is correct. Who made them arbiters of what needs to be discussed?
Absolutely. Just before Brian comes on his stuff here, David, I just wanted to say again, because we've said it on this program before, I still would like to see some consistency from government, from commentators, from the media on why we need the precautionary principle for climate change. We need the precautionary principle we needed it for smoking, for the smoking ban. We need the precautionary principle for COVID-19. But with respect to 5G, we don't need the precautionary principle because it's just presumed to be safe on the basis of, as the Lancet's saying, on research that was done 20 years ago, when in fact the technology is so completely different. And I have to say, David, one of the things that I'm beginning to get a hint of, that there's an attempt in the mainstream media here to present anybody that's questioning, asking questions about either 5G or coronavirus. They're trying to link those two things together and discredit those questions.
Yes, and the same conspiracy theorist claims and tinfoil hat claims will be made on anyone who asks questions. And they will try and pick on someone who is not very well informed and is asking questions in a crass way to paint the very idea of questioning these things as being ridiculous. And that's not what the science is showing. And that's not what reason is showing. And we shouldn't allow ourselves to be fooled.
These birds are attacking the cell tower. Watch them as they pull the wiring out of the rectennas. Watch how they disable this death tower. I wonder if they're going to send the FBI after these birds. What do these birds know that we don't know? We've seen the footage of birds dropping dead near these death towers. Is it possible that these birds understand that these death towers are killing them? Look at them attack in unison, and they're each attacking a different rectenna, like an army swooping in. Like and share, ladies and gentlemen. Get people aware. You know, the birds and the bees are dropping dead. So are the trees. And here comes the birds, like some kind of Twilight Zone episode. And they're taking this cell tower apart. What is going on? What don't people understand about these cell towers? Well, if you did a little research, you'd be just like these birds, too. Are they coming for a cell tower near you? Could be. They're angry. The birds are angry. And if they could take out all of these death towers, they would probably do it. The birds might need your help. The bees might need your help. Your neighbors might need your help. Do you know what you're being exposed to with these death towers? It's incredible. There's the video. It's worse than a microwave oven. It's off the scales. You need to get, yourself a meter that picks up these death towers. The El Cheapo from Home Depot won't do it. Shop around. You want one of these meters. Now, we found the very best one, the EMF 390. It's only $129 direct from the manufacturer through our affiliate link on our website, stfnreport.com. But you could spend 2-3 times as much and get, like a tri-field meter like this one, or the gigahertz solution, which can run you up to $1,000 with all the gear. We like the EMF 390. Shop around. The evidence is there. We've talked about the white papers with the long lists of PhDs, MDs, professors, researchers, demanding a stop to the rollout of 5G. And the mainstream media comes on and they're like, oh, all these crazy people, they don't like the 5G. Now you're a prisoner at home, or you were until just recently. But they've got you exactly where they want you. And you're surrounded by these death towers. And at least the birds are doing something about it. If you tolerate their activity, it's just going to get worse. And so that's what everybody's doing right now. They're just tolerating this activity. And it is getting worse. More death towers, more Gladio B events, super virus, the works. What's next? Well, the chip. And, not just the chip for your vaccine, but the brain chip. They're going to jack you into the matrix. That's what's coming. Look how the video guy is fired. It's tough keeping up with the video guy. But look, there's been well over 100 towers that have burned down in the past few weeks. People are taking this seriously. And there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that these things are deadly, that they're causing all sorts of health issues, not just cancer. And so, is anyone surprised that people are trying to survive? How many of you are surprised that death towers are burning? And little by little, we're going to see this system crash. If people just sit back and do nothing, you are totally going to lose control of your destiny. You're totally going to lose control of your lives. And shouldn't you have some say about what's going on? I mean, a lot of people just vote and assume that the system will take care of itself, that they're somehow on your side. They're not on your side. These people are out to get you. But everybody out there should participate in the solution before it's too late, before they roll out their Skynet, their Terminators, before they plug you into the Matrix, before their transhuman agenda is too far gone to come back. You've got to fight for humanity. You've got to fight for future generations, for all the children out there. You might not care, but one day it'll hit you like, we had a chance back then. Go watch the Braveheart speech. You would give it all up to come back to this moment in time while you still had a chance. And this may be the only chance we have before the second wave. This summer is going to make a difference. Fight on every issue and never give up, ladies and gentlemen. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Next, we turn to the town of Elberton, Georgia, the granite capital of the world. Elberton is famous for its production of tombstones, exporting some 250,000 tombstones every year. Oddly enough, the town that makes a living through death is also the home of what some consider the most threatening monument in America. A monument that some believe is a symbol for the coming Holocaust, promoting a depopulation effort at a massive scale.
It was back in 1979 when a stranger came to Elberton, Georgia. Now, Elberton, Georgia is on the eastern part of Georgia, very close to the South Carolina border. And this stranger said that he was part of a secret group, and they wanted to build a great granite monument.
This was done by a guy who gave a pseudonym, came in, paid cash, had this company set these things up in 1980. Called himself R.C. Christian, but that's not his real name. It says it right on the stones, a pseudonym.
Nobody knows his real name because that isn't his real name. Nobody knows who put the money up other than this fictional individual. Nobody knows what secret group he represents. Of course, Elberton mines granite. They make tombstones there. And they had the facilities to mine the granite. But he gave very, very specific directions as to how this was to be built, so that it would always be aligned in certain ways, so you'd always be able to see the North Star, so it would be aligned with the moon and with the various phases of the sun. And very, very similar to the Stonehenge that they have in England. So as the Stonehenge was a Druidic monument, this was to be the American Stonehenge, or it's known as the Georgia Guidestones. And on each one of the Guidestones is this message in a different language, actually 8 different languages, are the 10 commandments that come from the dark side. And the first one is maintain the world population at 500 million in constant balance with nature, which doesn't sound too bad until you realize that we've got over 6 billion people in the world. And if we're going to maintain the world population at 500 million in constant balance with nature, we're going to have to kill off about 90% or more of the world's population.
Just to show that this is happening all over the world right now, there is a massive move by the New World Order, whatever you want to call them, to bring some type of global communist government throughout the entire world right now over this whole COVID thing that's going on. So let's go to clip 6, Global Police State right now, just for a couple minutes of highlights of what's going on with these police all over the world, taking on these protesters that just want to open things back up and work and live their lives.
What are you flexing for? Don't flex. You got a lot of stuff too. Look. He ain't even do nothing. He ain't even do nothing. Look. He ain't even do nothing.
My son's with me. I am not under arrest for anything. Why is she under arrest? You need to get your hands under arrest.
The 4-year-old son is scared.
Why is she under arrest?
Baby! He ain't touch the baby! Leave her alone!
No, I'm not. I have nothing to do with you. You're scaring my son. What offense has she done? Away from me and my son.
They're ripped apart, her son kicking and screaming, held back by 2 officers.
First protester of the day to get arrested for violating the public health order. Deputies arrested another man after this protester got on the beach.
Seeing just clip after clip of police just haul people away, throwing them to the ground, headlocks. I mean, complete police state behavior.
But there has been some reaction to all this.
Well, I've got a couple of examples here of how the public are starting to see the actions of the police, and it's not good. We see here one Photoshop photograph where half Nazi officer, half police officer have been photoshopped together, and the text is, "I was just following orders." Now, this is unfortunately valid criticism because that's what's happening. Orders have been given, orders have been followed. The law, which is meant to protect us all, is being ignored, and people's rights are being infringed. And we've also got one, do you have what it takes to be a contact tracer? This is, the government was recruiting contact tracers to watch the population and track us all down. Might not be now because the software doesn't work, but that's been applied over a German World War II recruitment poster for the SS. So that shows how some people are seeing this. And this view that the authoritarian response of the state is in fact oppression is gaining ground and gaining it rapidly.
I've been in law enforcement for 10 years, and I'm speaking to my peers, other fellow officers, people in any kind of law enforcement position. I've seen officers nationwide enforcing tyrannical orders against the people, and I'm hoping it's the minority of officers, but I'm not sure anymore, because every time I turn on the television, every time I look to the internet, I'm seeing people arrested or cited for going to church, for traveling on the roadways, for going surfing, opening their businesses, going to the park with their families, and arrest them and charge them with what? With a crime? We need to start looking at ourselves as officers and thinking, is what I'm doing right? Now, I want to remind you that regardless of where you stand on the coronavirus, we don't have the authority to do those things to people. We're violating people's rights and taking money from them, or even worse, arresting them and depriving them of their freedom. And this is what I'm seeing. First Amendment rights, telling people they can't go to church, freedom of religion, okay? Telling people they can't protest, freedom of assembly. Fourth Amendment violations, illegal traffic stops to check for papers. What are you, the Gestapo? Is this 1930s Nazi Germany? You don't get to stop people unless you have reasonable suspicion or probable cause that they have committed a crime. And I know people that have personally been stopped saying, we want to see papers showing that you're essential.
David 2, copy a phone call.
That is not how our job works, okay? What really has been pissing me off lately is the fact that these officers that are going out here and enforcing these tyrannical orders, what they're doing is they're putting my job and my safety at risk. Because what you're doing is you're widening the gap between public trust and law enforcement officers. And what that's going to do is it's going to, I mean, look at what's happened to law enforcement in the last 10 years. Less and less public trust, and more often than not, that is a result of isolated incidents that get blown out of proportion. Well, they're not isolated anymore. They're happening every single day. And the thing that I want you guys to realize is that our power that we hold as law enforcement officers, it's nothing more than a facade. It's a badge and a gun. And people, you don't realize, if you haven't lived in anarchy, if you haven't seen combat, things can be stripped from people in a heartbeat. And that's what I'm afraid of. And us as law enforcement officers, we'll have our ability to enforce the law stripped from us in about 10 minutes. Okay? I think what is going to happen if this continues is we're going to see bloodshed in the streets. Okay? I don't want to see bloodshed in the streets on either side of this coin. I don't want to see fellow officers get injured or killed, and I certainly don't want to see citizens get injured or killed. You know, you don't get to just say, well, I'm doing this because I was told to do so, or I'm following orders. And I don't understand why that concept is so hard for people to understand. Listen, you need to stand up for what's right. You need to, if you're part of a department or an agency that is asking people or asking their officers or their deputies to impose on people's rights and infringe on their freedoms, you need to step up and say, no, that's not me. That's not what I signed up for, and that's going against my oath. And if that costs you your job, so be it. At least you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror at night. I've already expressed this to my department. And luckily for me, I come from a department that I feel like my chain of command shares my view, but I don't care what department you're part of or what your chain of command thinks. You don't get to trample on people's liberty. And so, you know, as a special operations veteran, I've fought on the streets of Iraq under the U.S. government's guise of freedom. So I'll leave you with this, something that I learned as an E-nothing in the Army. No matter what situation you're put in, if you look inside yourself and ask yourself one question, am I doing the right thing? You ask yourself that, you know the answer. And no amount of money or no order or law or anything should be able to make you go against doing the right thing.
Welcome everyone, I'm Spiro, thanks for tuning in. Now I have said from the beginning of this outbreak that I'm more concerned about the government's response to it and the public's reaction to it in the form of a mob mentality than I am of the virus itself. Now in my previous report I covered how the US is now beginning to, in their own words, build an army of contact tracers which will be coming to people's homes, as we can clearly see included in House Resolution 6666. Yes, that's right, HR 6666. I'll leave a link for that very important report. Now, contact tracing was first rolled out in Singapore, as we now see the next phase of COVID 1984 being rolled out yet again first in Singapore, as robots are now being used to enforce social distancing. This robot dog is named Spot, a product of Boston Dynamics, an American engineering and robotics company, funded by the Pentagon's research division called Darpa, the same Darpa that is currently working on Nano-Tech for Bill Gates' new COVID-19 vaccine.
Let's keep Singapore healthy. For your own safety and for those around you, please stand at least 1 meter apart. Thank you.
Are we looking at the contact tracers of the future? These robot dogs can be retrofitted with different applications, for example, to open doors. And since this is a military-funded program, you can be sure that there will be military applications available that we have not seen yet. This is just one of Boston Dynamics' robots. They have a humanoid robot as well. I believe they are rolling out the dog robot first because it is less threatening, and they are conditioning us and preparing us for the idea of seeing robots rolled out on our streets. Think these robots couldn't be rolled out in your city? Well, Massachusetts police have already tested Spot for use as part of their bomb squad. And, quote, RoboCops have now been launched coast to coast in 16 states across the country. This is also a good time to point out that the military has banned coronavirus survivors from entering the military. They don't say why, but this could greatly impact the level of new recruits and may foster demand for incorporating robots more widely into the armed services. They even have a super creepy humanoid robot that looks like he is ready for a viral pandemic, complete with a gas mask. Again, I have to ask, are we looking at the new contact tracers of the future? This next clip is a dramatization or a spoof of a Boston Dynamics video, but I really don't think that we are that far off. For all we know, the robots could already be operating at this level. One advantage of having a robot is that they are less likely to refuse unconstitutional orders that humans may disobey.
What remains for science to do? How will it affect our lives?
This is a city of the near future.
Planned by scientists and designers for the General Motors exhibit at the World's Fair in New York. They see a future where man will be making fuller use of the world's at present untapped resources.
Improved technology will make it possible to penetrate jungles and build roads with tools so efficient that from tree cutting with a laser beam to laying road foundations will be a matter of only a few short hours with equipment like this. And from the heart of what was once tropical jungle will sprout new and glossy cities. In this world of tomorrow, overland communications will be vital, say the experts at the World's Fair. So superhighways will cross areas which are now served only by cart tracks, and faster, silent cars will travel them. And man will have conquered space too. And though we may smile, at this moment there are scientists working to make these startling conceptions a reality. But is it possible to know with any certainty what's likely to happen in the more distant future? In 1945, one man with remarkable foresight published a paper suggesting the use of communication satellites on exactly the same system now being planned. Horizon filmed him at the World's Fair in New York. He's Arthur Clarke. Trying to predict the future is a discouraging, hazardous occupation, because the prophet invariably falls between two stools. If his predictions sound at all reasonable, you can be quite sure that in 20 or at most 50 years, the progress of science and technology has made him seem ridiculously conservative. On the other hand, if by some miracle a prophet could describe the future exactly as it was going to take place, his predictions would sound so absurd, so far-fetched, that everybody would laugh him to scorn. This has proved to be true in the past, and it will undoubtedly be true, even more so, of the century to come. The only thing we can be sure about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic. So, if what I say now seems to you to be very reasonable, then I'll fail completely. Only if what I tell you appears absolutely unbelievable have you any chance of visualizing the future as it really will happen. Let's start by looking at the city of the future. Some people think that it will be like this. And they're quite right. In fact, everything you see now already exists. All the materials, all the ideas, these things can be put into practice immediately. But what about the city of the day after tomorrow? Say the year 2000. I think it will be completely different. In fact, it may not even exist at all. Oh, I'm not thinking of the atom bomb and the next Stone Age. I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough which has been made possible by developments of communications, particularly the transistor and, above all, the communications satellite. These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other wherever we may be, where we can contact our friends anywhere on Earth, even if we don't know their actual physical location. It will be possible in that age, perhaps only 50 years from now, for a man to conduct his business from Tahiti or Bali just as well as he could from London. In fact, if it proves worthwhile, almost any executive skill, any administrative skill, even any physical skill, could be made independent of distance. I'm perfectly serious when I suggest that one day we may have brain surgeons in Edinburgh operating on patients in New Zealand. When that time comes, the whole world will have shrunk to a point, and the traditional role of the city as a meeting place for man will have ceased to make any sense. In fact, men will no longer commute, they will communicate. They won't have to travel for business anymore, they'll only travel for pleasure. I only hope that when that day comes, and when the city is abolished, the whole world isn't turned into one giant suburb. In that world of the future, we will not be the only intelligent creatures. One of the coming techniques will be what we might call bioengineering, the development of intelligent and useful servants among the other animals on this planet, particularly the great apes and, in the oceans, the dolphins and whales. You know, it's a scandal of which we should be thoroughly ashamed that prehistoric man tamed all the domestic animals we have today. We haven't had even one in the last 5,000 years. It's about time we did so, and with our present knowledge of animal psychology and genetics, we could certainly solve the servant problem with the help of the monkey kingdom. Of course, eventually our super chimpanzees would start forming trade unions and we'd be right back where we started. However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys, they'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we're now at the beginning of inorganic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter. But even if the future does belong to the robots, our bodies and our brains still have immense untapped potentialities. For example, to cope with the information explosion, we may develop a machine for recording information directly onto the brain, as today we can record a symphony on tape. So we may one day be able to become instant experts, learning Chinese overnight, for example. Or we may be able to recall completely memories of past events so that we seem to relive them. In fact, techniques are already known for doing this in a rather limited way at the present. Alternatively, we may prefer to totally erase past unpleasant memories. Our bodies will also be more efficient, and they'll last longer. After all, it's only in this century that a patient had a better than 50% chance of any improvement when he was treated by his doctors. One of the great medical discoveries of the near future will be a method of suspended animation, so that a man can sleep away down the centuries and in this manner travel into the future. This technique, which may possibly be based on deep freezing, will one day be used to send into the future people suffering from diseases or ailments beyond the ability of present-day medical science to cure. Though I don't really know how one will calculate the health insurance contributions to pay for medical treatment 500 years hence. Another use of suspended animation will be for the long-range exploration of space. In this way, us short-lived creatures will be able to travel enormous distances, although we may not, of course, be so short-lived in the future, because even immortality may be on the cards one day. However, even without immortality, we may be able to make journeys lasting thousands of years, and such journeys will be necessary if we ever wish to cross the enormous gulfs which separate us from the stars. Distances so great that even light, traveling at 600 million miles every hour, takes years to cross them. But why should we attempt these immense voyages? Well, because it seems very certain that, at least at this moment in time, there are no other intelligent creatures in our own solar system. We have to go out to the stars to meet them. For certainly, out there among the 100,000 million other suns of our universe, there must be many civilizations, perhaps far higher than our own. The first contact with intelligent extraterrestrials will be the greatest adventure in the future of man. It may not happen for centuries, but one day it will come. Meanwhile, near at home, the there's plenty to do in this solar system on the moon and planets. Today, we can just reach the moon. Tomorrow, men will be living there. 100 years from now, some men will call it home. At the moment, it's a very unattractive kind of place to imagine as a home, and this is true of all the planets. There's not one on which unprotected men could live, or on which any form of life as we know it could exist, with the possible exception of Mars. However, 100 years from now, things will be very different. With the techniques which we are now acquiring, it will one day be possible to modify the environments on at least some of the planets so that men can live there without spacesuits or airtight cities. The technique for this has been called planetary engineering, and one astronomer has coined the very optimistic phrase, the reconstruction of the solar system. Looking as far into the technological future as I dare, I'd like to describe the invention to end all inventions. I call it the replicator, and it's simply a duplicating machine. But it's a duplicating machine that can make an exact copy of anything. Now, we're all really familiar with perfect copies of printing, of pictures, and of sounds. Yes, the camera and the tape recorder would have seemed miraculous to our ancestors. And to a medieval monk, who perhaps in his whole life only saw a few dozen books, each one patiently copied by hand, our present world in which literally millions of books exist would again have seemed absolutely inconceivable. Can we imagine a world in which objects can be made as easily as today we can make books? Well, don't ask me exactly how the replicator would work. If I knew, I'd patent it at once.
This pizza has just been printed. This pizza's just been printed. This is food that has just been printed.
Okay, now can we go into some detail?
Okay, I'm sorry. This is blowing my mind. We're in Star Trek zone right now. We're at XYZ Printing.
Yeah.
We've both eaten food that's just been printed.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Okay, so we just ate.
This pizza has just been printed.
We just ate 3D printed cookies. They tasted like butter cookies. They were in the shapes of dinosaurs. They kissed, and they were really good. They tasted
good.
like legitimate, like home-baked butter cookies, and I don't understand how this is happening.
Okay, so this printer, this is going to blow your mind. This printer is actually going to come out on the market later this year for less than $2,000. You can actually print food in your home. And we haven't tried the pizza, but there's all kinds of stuff. You can print things in shapes. Like we ate some dinosaur shapes.
Yeah.
You can print some things like gingerbread cookie shapes.
Okay, and there's it's not just it's cookies, it's pizzas. There's toast. There's a cake with little like acrylic frosting on it. There's dinosaur chocolate. I don't know what's happening, but I want this in my house.
They just printed a pizza at this booth at CES. I don't know what more I can say.
I don't know.
They printed a pizza here.
We've been seeing a lot of weird things. We experienced a lot of weird things, but I feel like this is the one thing I've seen of CES where I'm like, this is it, man. This is sort of the future.
We're living in the future.
Yeah.
Living in the future.
Yeah.
Living in the future.
Yeah.
I'm so happy. XYZ Printing, bringing this to market. We'll have more on this.
Oh my God, we're gonna have so much.
We're gonna have so much. We'll have more of this.
Yeah.
Here at CES. Keep it on IGN.
They printed a pizza.
They printed a pizza.
Confronted with such a device, our present society would probably sink into a kind of gluttonous barbarism because everybody would want unlimited quantities of everything since nothing would cost anything. In fact, cynics may doubt if any human society could survive an invention which would lead to unlimited abundance and the final ending of the curse of Adam. And yet, you know, human beings are almost infinitely adaptable. Look at the incredible changes we've experienced and survived from the Stone Age to the present time. And yet even greater changes are still to come. Because the future is not merely an extension of the present with bigger and better machines and cities and gadgets. It will be fundamentally different. And many of the things we take for granted will one day pass away as completely as spinning wheels and sedan chairs and oil lamps. And that is why the future is so endlessly fascinating. Because try as we can, we'll never outguess it.
The Gateway Foundation was formed to build the first spaceport. In order to do that, we must first build a few smaller structures first. One of the most important is the von Braun rotating space station. This will likely be the first commercial space construction project in history. My name is John Blinko, and I'm president of the Gateway Foundation. The von Braun station will be a rotating space station designed to produce varying levels of artificial gravity by increasing or decreasing the rate of rotation. The station will be designed from the start to accommodate both national space agencies conducting low gravity research and space tourists who want to experience life on a large space station with the comfort of low gravity and the feel of a nice hotel. Our original design was very much like Wernher von Braun's rotating space station, hence the name, but we soon saw problems and had to change the design. There will be 2 hemispheres of 12 modules. Each hemisphere will have one KRB, kitchen, restaurant, bar, one GA, gymnasium, auditorium, and one AWP, air, water, power processing module. There will be at least one module for station crew. The rest of the modules will be for customer use, laboratories for national space agencies, hotel rooms for paying guests, and villas for those who can afford one. Each of these modules will be configured to suit the demands of our customers. There will be modules for station workers, modules designed as laboratories. Other modules will be configured as hotels for space tourists. And then there's my favorite, the villa. Similar to how Boeing will customize an airliner frame to create a VIP private jet, so too will we have modules fitted for wealthy customers. VIP jets can be very plush, but this station will have far lower noise levels, consistent pressurization, and no turbulence or vibration. It will be more like a billionaire's yacht. Will restaurant chains operate the restaurants? Will hotel chains operate the rooms in the tourist modules? Imagine what it will do for their loyalty programs if they have a drawing for a free ticket to those who join. Who could resist? The von Braun station's design will allow for the meeting and collaboration of a community of nations with space programs, corporations with space objectives, and space tourists who want to visit space for a unique off-world experience. Shared use areas like the restaurants, gymnasiums, and game rooms will bring these people from different backgrounds together. At the same time, it will give each of these spaceflight entities the privacy we all need from time to time in their own modules, rented spaces, or hotel rooms. National space agencies will be able to buy and configure their modules as they see fit, and then later sell their positions on the station to recover their expenditure. The reselling of space property will completely change the dynamic of space expenditures from one with huge financial losses to one with great financial rewards. Von Braun will be a rotating space station that is economically self-sustaining, offering both community and privacy, vital low-gravity research and tourism. This is the station we need to build right now. The Von Braun station is the perfect first project for orbital assembly to test and use the tools we need to build spaceports. Bots will help astronauts perform repetitious or dangerous tasks. Pods and arms will move heavy structural items into place. Drones will perform several jobs all over the construction site. And the G-cell, or truslator, or both, will assemble large trusses for the structural rings. By far the biggest reason to build the Von Braun space station is to validate the basic design structure for the Gateway spaceport. The hub, spoke, and rim system of building spaceports has never been demonstrated off-world and needs to be tested before we build big structures big enough to accommodate cities in space. The first part to be built will be the frame. Does this structure look familiar? It should. We've done this before, down here. How to pay for this station. Tourists and tenants. Von Braun Station will be just like an apartment building in New York City that has hotels, restaurants, gymnasiums, auditoriums, and temporary parking. Our building's job will be to provide air, water, and power to our tenants, and gravity, but that's free of charge. Our list of possible tenants includes: number 1, sovereign customers, NASA from America, ESA from Europe, JAXA from Japan, Russia, China, India, Australia, Canada, South Korea, Brazil, and more. There are 13 nations who have launched rockets into orbital space. There are over 70 nations with space programs. Number 2, space corporations, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, Bigelow Aerospace, Boeing, Lockheed, and many more. 3, space societies like Asgardia. Number 4, billionaires. There are over 2,000 billionaires around the world. How many would want to have their own villa off-world? The option to own property in orbit has never come up until now. Would Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson buy a module? Would Michael Jordan want to set up a basketball court at lunar gravity? He could wear his Jordans and jump around like they had flubber inside. There are lots of possibilities. Who foresaw that the first SpaceX Starship client was an artist who wanted to have an experience like no one else has had for over 5 decades? I believe that it will happen the same way for the Von Braun station, maybe even the same person. Who could resist the chance to have their own villa in space? The first privately owned property, off-world, in history. He or she might step out from a profession that is far removed from the space industry. Number 5. There is also the person who wants to visit space for a few days, but does not have enough money to buy their own villa. For every billionaire who wants to visit space, there are millions of well-off people who will buy a ticket to the orbital Hilton for a 3-day off-world excursion. And last, number 6. My favorite is the middle-class person who wants to go too, but can't afford to blow their retirement getting there. For that person, we have created the Gateway Foundation Crew Membership. Each year, we will choose one of these people from the first 1,000 members and one from the first 10,000 to visit the station at our expense. We created the crew membership for lots of good reasons, but the biggest one has to do with the powerful force of innovation stemming from human curiosity. When everyday people get involved, things start to move fast. The biggest change this station will bring to space will be a much larger requirement of workers from many sectors of industry. Many more scientists will be doing more research, more astronauts to build, operate, and maintain the station, more pilots to operate space shuttles, space taxis, and spacecraft. And for the first time, we will need workers from many walks of life just to run the station. We will have restaurants, so we will need wait staff. We will need cooks, and we will need people to clean up after. They say if you have a bar with footy on the telly, then you have to have a brig, so we will need security too. The rooms will need to be cleaned and the sheets washed. The gymnasium will need instructors to help people from twisting their ankles while they learn that weight is different from mass. We will have a doctor or two. We will need lots of people, and those of you who are part of our Gateway crew know that the first place that we look for motivated, qualified people who want to be station crew is from our crew membership. The Gateway Foundation Crew Membership was created so people who share our passion for space travel could have a significantly higher chance of visiting space in their lifetime. But it also gave us a pool of people to draw from who had talents and skills needed for designing and building space stations, spaceports, and other large structures in space. This has worked out really well. We have been hiring from our crew membership exclusively for over a year now. My father's generation sent people to the moon. When we build Von Braun Station, we will make history too. First rotation will be a monumental event, much like the first steps on the moon. But when the station first spins up, there may be close to 400 people on board. Heads of state, billionaires in the space industry, and many celebrities. The names of the first people to experience artificial gravity in space for the first time in history will be remembered as a who was there moment for generations. I believe America is a superpower that needs a super project. This country has never done better than when it has accepted the challenge of a great undertaking that would change everything. The SpaceX Starship and the Von Braun rotating space station will usher in an era of space habitation and space communities long dreamed of, but never attained. We have the technology to build this station, and it is economically feasible. This is going to happen because its time has come, and it can happen fast, because a lot of the things that we need are already made or can be fabricated with off-the-shelf materials and technology. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about our crew. We are not from a few nations. We are from all over the world. In fact, it's only a matter of time before we have Gateway Foundation crew members representing every nation on Earth. We are a team with a common objective: to form a space construction industry, to create transportation infrastructure off-world, and to transition humankind into a spacefaring race. The Gateway Foundation created the first space construction company, called Orbital Assembly, 2 years ago. We choose a rotating space station as a first project to develop the space construction tools that we will need to later build much larger spaceports. That first rotating space station is called Voyager Station. This video will describe in detail how we will launch and assemble this station in low Earth orbit quickly, systematically, and safely. My name is John Blenko. I'm president of the Gateway Foundation and CEO of Orbital Assembly. For those of you who are hearing about this for the first time, we are about to witness something extraordinary. Just as we saw the private rocket industry come into being over the last few years, we are going to see the space construction industry form to support rocket companies, space mining operations, and cislunar activity. What we build in low Earth orbit and then further out will forever change how we think about space, because many of us will get a chance to go, either as tourists or as workers. Space will no longer be a far-off place, but instead a destination that is attainable. The executive board of Orbital Assembly has chosen to change the prospective name of this rotating space station. After listening to the concerns of the community, we seek to create an inclusive experience for all without the distractions of the previous name selection detracting from the hard work of our engineering teams and scientists. As a result, we felt the need to rename the station away from historical figures. We selected the name Voyager Station for its designation as the first interstellar probe campaign and for the universal sentiment it represents. We chose this name to inspire future citizen astronauts who will one day visit Voyager Station, to reflect their spirit of exploration and adventure. As Satalites once said, Earth is the cradle of humanity, but mankind cannot stay in the cradle forever. In August of 2012, Voyager 1 left not just the cradle, but the home, our heliosphere, and moved into interstellar space. Both Voyager probes now lead our solar system together as they apply our galaxy's vastness. We will need a significant inventory of drones to build anything large in space. The main role of these drones will be Errant Object Retrieval, or EOR. EOR is a critical mission that will require at least 3 types of drones to make sure that any tools or parts floating away will be brought back to the construction site so the work may continue uninterrupted. The first type of drone that we will develop will be the observer drone. This drone's job will be to watch the astronauts or bots as they are working and alert them if anything starts to float away, so they can reach out and grab it. The second type we call Frog's Tongue. This is an ambulatory drone that will follow the astronaut to the worksite, and if a tool starts to float away that is beyond the astronaut's reach, then the astronaut would command Frog's Tongue to reach out with its extension arm to grab the tool and return it to the astronaut. This drone's leg box will also be a platform for many operations like moving heavy toolboxes or parts to the worksite. The third type of drone will be a retriever drone that will be dispatched when an errant object is too far away for Froggy to attempt a quick grab. This drone will be able to track down tools and parts that are hundreds of meters or even kilometers away. There will be multiple variants and sizes of each of these drones to be used for different types of applications. The International Space Station has lost a number of tools and parts during its construction over the years. Once a tool or part is beyond arm's length, it is lost forever. On a construction site as large as Voyager's, it would be easy to create clouds of tools and parts around the work site that would be hazardous to any approaching craft. EOR systems must be in place before work begins. When we built the International Space Station, we moved big heavy things around using the Canada arm. Arms were used successfully for decades on the space shuttle. So when we built the International Space Station, we put a big arm there too. The Canada arm does a good job and it's very versatile, but it's also limited in how far it can move things, and since it's slow, it takes hours to reposition it. Pods will move large objects and modules just as arms would, but they have almost unlimited range. At times, pods will work in pairs or teams, and there will be complications to that, but nothing that we can't handle. To build Voyager Station, we will use both arms and pods. There are many bot manufacturers right now and more coming. A few have dedicated themselves to making bots for space operations like General Motors Robonaut and MDA's Dexter. More will follow. Their problem is that they only have one buyer, NASA. As we start building structures in space, their potential marketplace will expand, and they will invest in their product lines accordingly. To build Voyager Station, we will need to have a base of operations in orbit for workers to operate from. OCC Alpha will be designed to host many space construction assets and provide living quarters for workers as they assemble the station around Alpha. Alpha will also be able to service the bots, pods, and drones that are launched from its flight deck every day to build the station. Alpha will have multiple elevator airlocks, so both astronauts and construction assets can be moved from inside the habitation area to the flight deck above. Alpha is not a laboratory. Alpha's life will start as a construction coordination control center that orchestrates the assembly of Voyager station. Later, after Voyager is built, Alpha will function as a control center for Voyager operations and dispatch pods and drones for repairs while monitoring the health of the station. Alpha will also be the prime operations center for the dark side gate and will coordinate Voyager approach control with incoming spacecraft. Voyager station could first spin up with only 4 modules on each side. This would only occur if a significant delay were to set back the launch of the remaining station modules. To add the remaining modules at a later date would require a station spin down. But we will have planned for station spin downs each year anyway for station service. But we do not anticipate any delays. In fact, with only 24 modules to offer, we fully expect that many nations, corporations, and affluent people will want to have a presence here, and positions will be secured quickly once offered. The station would now be complete, and first rotation would occur shortly thereafter, but our mission would not be over. We would continue to build more and more stations and structures until a community of orbital assets were in place, both serving the station and serving the community. Very soon after Voyager station is operational, you will need a maintenance facility to service the ships bringing people and supplies to the station. Many times in my career as a 747 pilot, I've had a malfunction at the gate that caused us to need parts and service. That will happen at Voyager Station 2, with rockets and shuttles serving the station. Not long after our space construction industry is formed, we will begin building factories to build things in space. Power stations and huge space telescopes. Satellites will be made to order on orbit, and they will be refurbished and reconfigured on orbit too. Around Voyager Station, an entire community of support stations and facilities will quickly form. Maintenance facilities will be needed to repair incoming spacecraft, and fuel depots to refuel them. Nearby zero-G stations will use Voyager Station as their hotel, so their crews can get a good meal and some exercise when they need it. Eventually, even farms will be built, and more orbital hotels will join the community. Voyager Station will have an even bigger impact than just first rotation. The station's design allows for a surplus of recycled water to be created with the arrival of every supply ship. Fresh spring water for consumption is brought up every week to the station. After the water is recycled, it is not used again for human consumption. This will allow us to keep producing surplus water that can be sold to fuel depots and farms in orbit. But before we do that, we will use surplus water to create an ice shield to further block radiation and protect the station from MMOD. Also, this station will be able to create an enormous amount of power that could generate a magnetospheric shield around the whole habitation ring. With rotation and a powerful radiation shield in place, this station will be very well equipped to deliver colonists to every part of our solar system in a healthy environment if propulsion were added. Future craft designed with Voyager Station's radiation shielding and rotation could take colonists and explorers to any place in our solar system. This beautiful video by Eric Warnquist is an excellent depiction of just how far we can go with a craft designed in this manner. Almost everything you see in this video is a product of a space construction industry using many of the tools we will develop in the next few years. But how much gravity do we need to spin for? How much G do we need to keep our bones from falling apart? And how much to stop the health problems all the astronauts are getting? And the big one, how much G for human gestation? We will learn all this and more when we build Voyager Station. It will be a revolution in both space habitation and transportation. But the biggest revolution is not technical, it's personal. It's less about building large structures in space as it is more about you getting your chance to go there, to work there. A friend of mine was a Darpa program manager. He wrote a report describing a turning point in human history where a generation of people who are properly equipped and motivated will become builders of large structures in space. He dubs these people the Starship generation. It is not that they build starships, but that they can build whatever they want because they have the tools and the knowledge to construct spaceports and rotating spaceships that can take people anywhere in our solar system. That person is Dave Barnhart. He is now the director of USC's Space Engineering Research Center. I believe that the generation he speaks of is this generation. This new industry will start with thousands of high-paying jobs, just like we see in other space industry occupations. But soon, space construction will grow to offer millions of jobs as we build communities and factories in low Earth orbit. In the decades and in the centuries to come, we will see that building large structures in space will be the biggest thing that we do as a race, because the structures that we will build will be bigger than most of us can imagine at this time. We stand on the doorstep of a massive low Earth orbit expansion that would not just include orbital cities and factories, but eventually huge habitats that house forests, jungles, savannas, and Arctic reserves. Perhaps we'll even one day build ocean reserves in orbit that have pods of whales and schools of fish. We may be building those habitats or on Mars or Saturn. And remember this, once we start expanding into space, we will never stop. With a robust space construction industry, humankind's domain will continue to grow beyond low Earth orbit until there are settlements throughout our solar system and beyond. Eventually, humans will build around other stars and even to the edges of our galaxy, the same way that terrestrial construction has expanded to every continent on this planet. 4 of the Orbital Assembly Corporation board members, including myself, will be presenting at the AIAA Ascend Conference in Las Vegas, Nevada in November. I will be speaking about commercial artificial gravity space stations and infrastructure and several other topics. Dr. Thomas Spilker, our Vice President of Engineering, will speak about the engineering challenges of artificial gravity space stations. In another presentation, he will talk about the need for self-sustaining off-world colonies and the infrastructure they require. Gateway Foundation Space Architect and Orbital Assembly's COO, Tim Elatorre, will discuss the first rotating space station, Voyager Station. And Jeff Greenblatt, our Chief Visionary Officer, will present on orbital space tourism market size estimation.
This is Aldous Huxley, a man haunted by a vision of hell on earth. A searing social critic, Mr. Huxley, 27 years ago, wrote Brave New World, a novel that predicted that someday the entire world would live under a frightful dictatorship. Today, Mr. Huxley says that his fictional world of horror is probably just around the corner for all of us. We'll find out why in a moment.
The Mike Wallace Interview, presented by the American Broadcasting Company in association with the Fund for the Republic, brings you a special television series discussing the problems of survival and freedom in America.
Good evening, I'm Mike Wallace. Tonight's guest, Aldous Huxley, is a man of letters, as disturbing as he is distinguished. Born in England, now a resident of California, Mr. Huxley has written some of the most electric novels and social criticism of this century. He's just finished a series of essays called Enemies of Freedom, in which he outlines and defines some of the threats to our freedom in the United States. And Mr. Huxley, right off the bat, let me ask you this. As you see it, who and what are the enemies of freedom here in the United States?
Well, I don't think you can say who in the United States. I don't think there are any sinister persons deliberately trying to rob people of their freedom. But I do think, first of all, that there are a number of impersonal forces which are pushing in the direction of less and less freedom. And I also think that there are a number of technological devices which anybody who wishes to use can use to accelerate this process of going away from freedom, of imposing control.
Well, what are these forces and these devices, Mr. Huxley?
I should say that there are two main impersonal forces. The first of them is not exceedingly important in the United States at the present time, though very important in other countries. This is the force which in general terms can be called overpopulation, the mounting pressure of population pressing upon existing resources. This, of course, is an extraordinary thing. Something is happening which has never happened in the world's history before. I mean, let's just take a a simple fact that between the time of the birth of Christ and the landing of the Mayflower, the population of the Earth doubled. It rose from 250 million to probably 500 million. Today, the population of the Earth is rising at such a rate that it will double in half a century.
Well, why should overpopulation work to diminish our freedoms?
Well, in a number of ways. I mean, the experts in the field, like Harrison Braun, for example, pointed out that in the underdeveloped countries, actually the standard of living is at present falling, that people have less to eat and less goods per capita than they had 50 years ago. And as the position of these countries, the economic position, becomes more and more precarious, obviously the central government has to take over more and more responsibility for keeping the ship of state on an even keel. And then, of course, you're likely to get social unrest under such conditions, with again an intervention of the central government. So that I think one sees here a pattern which seems to be pushing very strongly towards a totalitarian regime. And unfortunately, as in all these underdeveloped countries, the only highly organized political party is the Communist Party, it looks rather as though they will be the heirs to this unfortunate process, that they will step into the position of power.
Well, then, ironically enough, one of the greatest forces against communism in the world, the Catholic Church, according to your thesis, would seem to be pushing us directly into the hands of the communists because they are against birth control.
Well, I think this strange paradox probably is true. There is it's an extraordinary situation, actually. I mean, one has to look at it, of course, from a biological point of view. The whole essence of biological life on Earth is a question of balance, and what we have done is to practice death control in a most intensive manner without balancing this with the birth control at the other end. Consequently, the birth rates remain as high as they were, and death rates have fallen substantially.
All right, then, so much for the time being anyway for overpopulation. Another force that is diminishing our freedoms.
Well, another force which I think is very strongly operative in this country is the force of what may be called over-organization. As technology becomes more and more complicated, it becomes necessary to have more and more elaborate organizations, more hierarchical organizations. And incidentally, the advance of technology has been accompanied by an advance in the science of organization. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before. And so that you have more and more people living their lives out as subordinates in these hierarchical systems controlled by bureaucracies, either the bureaucracies of big business or the bureaucracies of big government.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, the devices that you were talking about, are there specific devices or methods of communication which diminish our freedoms in addition to overpopulation and over-organization?
Well, there are certainly devices which can be used in this way. I mean, let us take, after all, a piece of very recent and very painful history is the propaganda used by Hitler, which was incredibly effective. I mean, what were Hitler's methods? Hitler used terror on the one kind, brute force on the one hand, but he also used a very efficient form of propaganda, which he was using every modern device at that time. He didn't have TV, but he had the radio, which he used to the fullest extent, and was able to impose his will on an immense mass of people. I mean, the Germans were a highly educated people.
Well, we're aware of all this, but how do you equate Hitler's use of propaganda with the way that propaganda, if you will, is used, let us say, here in the United States? Are you suggesting that there is a parallel?
Needless to say, it's not being used in this way now, but the point is, it seems to me, that there are methods at present available, methods superior in some respects to Hitler's method, which could be used in a bad situation. I mean, what I feel very strongly is that we mustn't be caught by surprise by our own advancing technology. This has happened again and again in history. technology is advanced, and this changes social conditions, and suddenly people have found themselves in a situation which they didn't foresee and doing all sorts of things they didn't really want to do.
Well, now, what do you mean? Do you mean that we develop our television, but we don't know how to use it correctly? Is that the point that you're making?
Well, at present, the television, I think, is being used quite harmlessly. It's being used, I think, I would feel it's being used too much to distract everybody all the time. But, I mean, imagine, which must be the situation in all communist countries, where the television, where it exists, is always saying the same thing the whole time, is always driving along. It's not creating a wide front of distraction, it's creating a one-pointed drumming in of a single idea all the time. It's obviously an immensely powerful instrument.
So you're talking about the potential misuse of the instrument.
Exactly. We have, after all technology is in itself morally neutral. These are just powers which can either be used well or ill. It's the same thing with atomic energy. We can either use it to blow ourselves up, or we can use it as a substitute for the coal and the oil which are running out.
You've even written about the use of drugs in this light.
Well, now, this is a very interesting subject. I mean, in this book that you mentioned, this book of mine, Brave New World, I postulated a substance called soma, which was a very versatile drug. It would make people feel happy in small doses. It would make them see visions in medium doses, and it would send them to sleep in large doses. Well, I don't think such a drug exists now, nor do I think it will ever exist, but we do have drugs which will do some of these things, and I think it's quite on the cards that we may have drugs which will profoundly change our mental states without doing us any harm. I mean, this is the pharmacological revolution which has taken place, that we have now powerful mind-changing drugs which, physiologically speaking, are almost costless. I mean, they are not like opium or like cocaine, which do change the state of mind, but leave terrible results physiologically and morally.
Mr. Huxley, in your new essays, you state that these various enemies of freedom are pushing us toward a real-life, brave new world, and you say that it's awaiting us just around the corner. First of all, can you detail for us what life in this brave new world which you fear so much, or what life might be like?
Well, to start with, I think this kind of the dictatorship of the future, I think will be very unlike the dictatorships which we've been familiar with in the immediate past. I mean, take another book prophesying the future, which was a very remarkable book, George Orwell's 1984. Well, this book was written at the height of the Stalinist regime and just after the Hitler regime. And there he foresaw a dictatorship using entirely the methods of terror, the methods of physical violence. Now, I think what is going to happen in the future is the dictators will find, as the old saying goes, that you can do everything with bayonets except sit on them. That if you want to preserve your power indefinitely, you have to get the consent of the ruled. And this they will do partly by drugs, as I foresaw in Brave New World, partly by these new techniques of propaganda. They will do it by bypassing the sort of rational side of man and appealing to his subconscious and his deeper emotions and his physiology even, and so making him actually love his slavery. I mean, I think this is the danger, that actually people may be in some ways happy under the new regime, but they will be happy in a situation where they oughtn't to be happy.
But let me ask you this. You're talking about a world that could take place within the confines of a totalitarian state. Let's become more immediate, more urgent about it. We believe, anyway, that we live in a democracy here in the United States. Do you believe that this brave new world that you talk about could, let's say in the next quarter century, the next century, could come here to our shores?
I think it could. I mean, that's why I feel it's so extremely important here and now to start thinking about these problems, not to let ourselves be taken by surprise by the new advances in technology. I mean, for example, in regard to the use of the drugs, we know there's enough evidence now for us to be able, on the basis of this evidence and using a certain amount of creative imagination, to foresee the kind of uses which could be made by people of bad will with these things, and to attempt to forestall this. And in the same way, I think with these other methods of propaganda, we can foresee and we can do a good deal to forestall. I mean, after all, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
You write in Enemies of Freedom, you write specifically about the United States. You say this, writing about American political campaigns. You say, all that is needed is money and a candidate who can be coached to look sincere. Political principles and plans for specific action have come to lose most of their importance. The personality of the candidate, the way he is projected by the advertising experts, are the things that really matter.
Well, this is... during the last campaign, there was a great deal of this kind of statement by the advertising managers of the campaign parties, this idea that the candidates had to be merchandised as though they were soap or toothpaste, and that you had to depend entirely on the personality. I mean, the personality is important, but there are certainly people with an extremely amiable personality, particularly on TV, who might not necessarily be very good in positions of political trust.
Well, do you feel that men like Eisenhower, Stevenson, Nixon, with knowledge of forethought, were trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the American public?
No, but they were being advised by powerful advertising agencies who were making campaigns of a quite different kind from what had been made before. And I think we shall see probably all kinds of new devices coming into the picture. I mean, for example, this thing which got a good deal of publicity last autumn, subliminal projection. I mean, as it stands, this thing, I think, is of no menace to us at the moment. But I was talking the other day to one of the people who has done most experimental work in the psychological laboratory with this, who was saying precisely this, that it is not at the moment a danger, but once you've established a principle that something works, you can be absolutely sure that the technology of it is going to improve steadily. And I mean, his view of the subject was that, well, maybe they will use it to some extent in the 1960 campaign, but they will probably use it a good deal and much more effectively in the 1964 campaign, because this is the kind of rate at which technology advances.
And we'll be persuaded to vote for a candidate that we do not know that we are being persuaded to vote for.
Exactly. I mean, this is the rather alarming feature, that you're being persuaded below the level of choice and reason.
In regard to advertising, which you mentioned just a little ago, in your writing, particularly in Enemies of Freedom, you attack Madison Avenue, which controls most of our television and radio advertising, newspaper advertising, and so forth. Why do you consistently attack the advertising agency?
Well, no, I think that advertisement plays a very necessary role, but the danger, it seems to me, in a democracy is this. I mean, what does a democracy depend on? A democracy depends on the individual voter making an intelligent and rational choice for what he regards as his enlightened self-interest in any given circumstance. But what these people are doing, I mean, what both for their particular purposes, for selling goods, and the dictatorial propagandists are doing, is to try to bypass the rational side of man and to appeal directly to these unconscious forces below the surface, so that you are, in a way, making nonsense of the whole democratic procedure, which is based on conscious choice on rational grounds.
Of course, well, maybe you have just answered this next question, because in your essay you write about television commercials, not just political commercials, but television commercials as such, and how, as you put it, today's children walk around singing beer commercials and toothpaste commercials, and then you link this phenomenon in some way with the dangers of a dictatorship. Now, could you spell out the connection, or how do you feel that you have done so sufficiently?
Well, I mean, here, this whole question of children, I think, is a terribly important one, because the children are quite clearly much more suggestible than the average grown-up. And again, suppose that for one reason or another all the propaganda was in the hands of one or very few agencies. you would have an extraordinarily powerful force playing on these children, who after all are going to grow up and be adults quite soon. I do think that this is not an immediate threat, but it remains a possible threat. And
you said something to the effect in your essay that the children of Europe used to be called cannon fodder, and here in the United States they are television and radio fodder.
Well, after all, you can read in the trade journals the most lyrical accounts of how necessary it is to get hold of the children, because then they will be loyal brand buyers later on.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, again, you just translate this into political terms. The dictator says they will be loyal ideology buyers when they're grown up.
We hear so much about brainwashing as used by the communists. Do you see any brainwashing other than that which we've just been talking about that is used here in the United States? Other forms of brainwashing?
Not in the form that has been used in China and in Russia, because this is essentially the application of propaganda methods, the most violent kind, to individuals. It's not a shotgun method like the advertising method. It's a way of getting hold of the person and playing both on his physiology and his psychology till he really breaks down, and then you can implant a new idea in his head. I mean, the descriptions of the methods are really blood-curdling when you read them, and not only the methods applied to political prisoners, but the methods applied, for example, to the training of the young communist administrators and missionaries. They receive an incredibly tough kind of training, which causes about 25% of them to break down or commit suicide, but produces 75% of completely one-pointed fanatics.
The question, of course, that keeps coming back to my mind is this. Obviously, politics in themselves are not evil. Television is not in itself evil. Atomic energy is not evil. And yet you seem to fear that it will be used in an evil way. Why is it that the right people will not, in your estimation, use them? Why is it that the wrong people will use these various devices and for the wrong motives?
Well, I think one of the reasons is that these are all instruments for obtaining power, and obviously the passion for power is one of the most moving passions that exist in man, and after all, all democracies are based on the proposition that power is very dangerous and that it's extremely important not to let any one man or any one small group have too much power for too long a time. After what are the British and American constitutions except devices for limiting power? And all these new devices are extremely efficient instruments for the imposition of power by small groups over larger masses.
Well, you ask this question yourself in Enemies of Freedom. I'll put your own question back to you. You ask this. In an age of accelerating overpopulation, of accelerating overorganization, and ever more efficient means of mass communication, how can we preserve the integrity and reassert the value of the human individual? You put the question. Now here's your chance to answer it, Mr. Huxley.
Well, this is obviously, first of all, it's a question of education. I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values. I mean, there is a tendency, as you probably read a book by White, The Organization Man, a very interesting, valuable book, I think, where he speaks about the new type of group morality, group ethic, which speaks about the group as though the group was somehow more important than the individual. But this seems, as far as I'm concerned, to be in contradiction with what we know about the genetical makeup of human beings, that every human being is unique. And it is, of course, on this genetical basis that the whole idea of the value of freedom is based. And I think it's extremely important for us to stress this in all our educational life. And I would say it's also very important to teach people to be on their guard against the sort of verbal booby traps into which they're always being led, to analyze the kind of things that are said to them. Well, I think there is this whole educational side, and I think there are many more things that one could do to strengthen people and to make them more aware of what was being done.
You're a prophet of decentralization.
Well, yes, if this is feasible, it's one of the tragedies, it seems to me. I mean, many people have been talking about the importance of decentralization in order to give back to the voter a sense of direct power. I mean, the voter in an enormous electorate feels quite impotent, and his vote seems to count for nothing. This is not true where the electorate is small and where he is dealing with a group which he can manage and understand. And if one can, as Jefferson, after all, suggested, break up the units into smaller and smaller units, and so get a real self-governing democracy.
Well, that was all very well in Jefferson's day, but how can we revamp our economic system and decentralize and at the same time meet militarily and economically the tough challenge of a country like Soviet Russia?
Well, I think the answer to that is that there are, it seems to me that the production, industrial production, is of two kinds. I mean, there are some kinds of industrial production which obviously need the most tremendously high centralization, like the making of automobiles, for example. But there are many other kinds where you could decentralize quite easily and probably quite economically, and that you would then have this kind of decentralized life. After all, you begin to see it now if you travel through the South, this decentralized textile industry which is springing up there.
Mr. Huxley, let me ask you this, quite seriously. Is freedom necessary?
As far as I'm concerned, it is, yes.
Why? Is it necessary for a productive society?
Yes, I should say it is. I mean, a genuinely productive society. I mean, I think you could produce plenty of goods without much freedom, but I think the whole sort of creative life of man is ultimately impossible without a considerable measure of individual freedom, that initiative, creation, all these things which we value, and I think value properly, are impossible without a large measure of freedom.
Well, Mr. Huxley, take a look again at the country which is in the stance of our opponent anyway it would seem to be there, Soviet Russia. It is strong and getting stronger economically, militarily. At the same time, it's developing its art forms pretty well. It seems not unnecessarily to squelch the creative urge among its people, and yet it is not a free society.
It's not a free society, but here is something very interesting, that those members of the society, like the scientists, who are doing the creative work, are given far more freedom than anybody else. I mean, it's a privileged aristocratic society in which, provided that they don't poke their noses into political affairs, these people are given a great deal of prestige, a considerable amount of freedom, and a lot of money. I mean, this is a very interesting fact about the new Soviet regime, and I think what we're going to see is a people on the whole with very little freedom, but with an oligarchy on top enjoying a considerable measure of freedom and a very high standard of living.
And the people down below, the epsilons down below,
enjoying very little.
And you think that that kind of situation can long endure?
I think it can certainly endure much longer than a situation in which everybody is kept down. Because, I mean, they can certainly get their technological and scientific results on such a basis.
Well, the next time that I talk to you then, perhaps we should investigate further the possibility of the establishment of that kind of a society, where the drones work for the queen bees up above.
Well, but yes, but I must say I still believe in democracy. If we can make the best of the creative activities of the people on top, plus those of the people on the bottom, so much the better.
Mr. Huxley, I surely thank you for spending this half hour with us, and I wish you Godspeed, sir.
Thank you.
Aldous Huxley finds himself these days in a peculiar and disturbing position. A quarter of a century after prophesying an authoritarian state in which people were reduced to ciphers, he can point at Soviet Russia and say, "I told you so." The crucial question, as he sees it now, is whether the so-called free world is shortly going to give Mr. Huxley the further dubious satisfaction of saying the same thing about us. Stay tuned for a preview of next week's interview. Till then, Mike Wallace, good night.
This is not a test.